This is a really awesome group. Thank you all for taking the time this morning to join us. I'll just go ahead and get things started. We might have some more people joining us here as we go, but I wanted to go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Liz Rains, and for anybody who doesn't know me, I have been working with the Alaska Press Club for the last few months, helping to prepare some of these professional development opportunities around the legislative session. I covered session myself for several years, and I know that sometimes it can be complicated to find the right information or track down an answer. So that's kind of the goal behind some of these sessions that we've put together. We've had a session with a legislative librarian who talked all about how to navigate the legislature's website. We've also had a session where we talked about some of the budget basics, how to read a budget, how to report on a budget. And today we want to cover just the basics of the legislative process. So we're really going to just throw things back to the basics. We want to kind of start unassuming that you have any kind of a background in legislative process. And the goal really is to make this a safe space for you to ask questions. A little bit of housekeeping. You can type your questions into the chat during the presentation today at any time. Or if you'd prefer to ask your question anonymously, there is a Q&A feature on Zoom itself that will let you pose a question anonymously. And if that question comes in while Mr. Sant, our speaker today, is still on the topic, he has given us permission graciously to interrupt him and pose the question. If he's moved on to another topic, just know that we may hold your question to the end of the presentation. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's speaker. So Chad Sant is a liberal arts major and a former educator in the Anchorage School District. And for nearly 30 years, he's taught Anchorage students about government, U.S. history, debate, and acting, most recently at Robert Service High School. And throughout his career, his students have praised him for his enthusiasm and ability to make any subject seem fun and exciting. And I can attest to that because Mr. Sant was my own high school teacher. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Sant. He's joining us from Bend, Oregon this morning. Good morning, Mr. Sant.
Good morning. Thank you. And first of all, can you hear me okay and see me okay and all of that? Okay, excellent. Well, let me just kind of piggyback on what Liz said. I am, first of all, very, very thrilled that she thought of me, and I'm thrilled to help put this presentation together. As Liz said, one of the things we really wanted to do was assume that you're kind of going into this carte blanche as a political reporter. Even though some of you might have done some political stories before, it can be overwhelming, the process. So we really tried to simplify it. And I also just want to piggyback on the comment that there is no stupid question here, because we're all still trying to figure it out ourselves. So to kick off things, we thought we would regress a little bit and go back to the geniuses at Schoolhouse Rock who put this classic video together. And so we're just going to play the video, and then I will kind of platform off of that video in talking about Alaska specifically and the legislative process in Alaska. So here we go. Let's see if we can make this work. All right.
As your body grows bigger,
your mind must flower.
It's great to learn,
'Cause knowledge is power.
It's Schoolhouse Rockin', the chip of the block of your favorite schoolhouse, Schoolhouse Rock.
Whew, you sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee, but I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will, but today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." Then he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm stuck in committee, and I'll sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be a law. I hope and pray that they will. But today I am still just a bill.
Listen to those congressmen arguing. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably, otherwise I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. Oh, but it looks like I'm gonna live. Now I go to the House of Representatives and they vote on me.
If they vote yes, what happens?
Then I go to the Senate and the whole thing starts all over again.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And if they vote for me on Capitol Hill, well, then I'm off to the White House where I'll wait in a line with a lot of other bills for the president to sign. And if he signs me, then I'll be a law. How I hope and pray that he will. But today I am still just a bill.
You mean even if the whole Congress says you should be a law, the president can still say no?
Yes, that's called a veto. If the president vetoes me, I have to go back to Congress and they vote on me again, and by that time you're so
By
old,
that time, it's very unlikely that you become a law. It's not easy to become a law, is it?
No, but how I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
He signed your bill. Now you're a law.
Oh, yes.
And we'll skip the little credits there. Yeah, as the video says, it is very difficult for a bill to become a law. And one thing I'd like you to think about is, what percentage of bills do you think become laws, both at the national and the state level? We'll talk about that a little bit later on and reveal the answer to that. So think about that, or just, Google it or whatever. As Liz said, we have the objectives, the purpose, and kind of what we're trying to do here. I lifted some of the language from how we described it, so this shouldn't be a secret. And we'll be covering the basics of the legislative process, power between the executive and the legislative, a tad, because it can get there's a lot more underlying dynamics, but we're just going to keep it very, very simple. And then, as Liz said, how to use the legislature's website. You'll hear me referring to this website a lot this morning. So who am I? I was dragged up to Alaska kicking and screaming when I was 3 years old. Lived up there from 1970 all the way till 2018. Was headed for law school actually when I decided to give teaching a try. I taught for about a year and a half, and I decided I never wanted to go to law school again. I worked for several lawyers in Alaska through college, and the closest I ever got to production or broadcasting was I was a radio DJ at Cash Radio, for those of you who like country music. I was also a DJ at K-Well. So I switched from Cash to hard rock, which was very interesting, and KFKD. And I did that for a while as I taught on weekends back when I thought I was immortal. So let's get into brass tacks here. What we're going to be talking about this morning is the Legislative Information Office has helped us put this together because I have literally taken some of their information on this, what we're calling a slide share. I still call them PowerPoints. But I just want to put out there right away that a lot of this information you can get off their website, and you can even visit a PowerPoint which is very similar to this and has a lot of the same information. We've just added to it. There will be a horde of vocabulary, about 40 words that will come up, concepts that you should be familiar with if you're not. One of the biggest ones in my mind is separating the difference between legislative and legislature. One is a noun and the other tends to be an adjective for lawmaking, right? Literally. So when we talk about the legislature, we're talking about all parts of the legislature. And so I just wanted to put those in front of you so that you can stare at them for a moment. And if you have any questions on any of those later and you're confused, be sure to ask. All right, so the Alaska Legislature, beautiful picture of the Capitol in Juneau, which hopefully will be well guarded this next week, right? Along with all the other 50 capitals around the United States and DC. And I have the Alaska Legislature website at the bottom, and I want to talk a little bit about that and how important that is. Alaska is very lucky, and teachers in Alaska are very lucky to have that website as a resource. There's a terrific amount of money that has been poured into that website, and they literally have everything you need right at your fingertips. If you can imagine being a reporter back in the days before the web and before you had everything literally at your fingertips digitally, it was a lot tougher. Everything was analog. You had to make a lot of phone calls. You couldn't just go online and find your answers. But the Alaska Legislature meets each year in Juneau. They are supposed to meet for 2 sessions lasting for a period of 90 days. But as you will find out, they have a lot of special sessions that can be called by the executive, the governor. So, you know, people say, well, they don't really earn their keep if they're only working for 180 days out of the year. I can assure you they work a lot more than 180 days out of the year, especially if they're called into special sessions. So the next slide is an example of one of the things that is available at the Alaska Legislature website, which I understand you have all been kind of kicking the tires on because of the other presentations. And if you haven't, just understand that it is very intuitive. The site is like one of the most intuitive sites I've ever visited, which is a great thing because you can find answers quickly. I pulled this one up because it was 2017, 2018, the year. They usually have these highlights where you can go and you can look and you can see what were the big events of the day. If you were able to scroll down, which you're not, so I did it for you, you can see how many legislative days they met. You can see all of the special sessions that were called between the first and the second regular session. You can see how many bills were introduced and how many bills were passed, which is awesome. And that is also a hint for what our answer is later on what percentage of bills actually become laws. You can also check out all the members of the Senate, all the members of the House, and you can just kind of know what that year was famous for. That is a work in progress, by the way, these things. So they're constantly changing and updating. Our legislature is bicameral, which means that there are 2 chambers, as opposed to a lot of other countries that have unicameral legislatures where there isn't 2 houses. But it's tradition that goes back to England. We kind of copycatted their parliament where they have the House of Lords and the House of Commons. We called ours the House of Representatives and the Senate. And there's a lot of history to both. They've shifted and changed around a lot, but Alaska has, like everything Alaska does, tried to do it their own way and tried to keep it really simple. You'll understand what I mean by that in a moment. So we have the representatives and the Senate. The Senate has 20 members who serve 4-year terms as opposed to 6-year terms, which national senators do. And it's presided over by the Senate president. That's important to remember. So the person that calls the shots gets to decide which bills are considered, which can be yanked at any time, including later on when they're having their floor debates. And each member represents one of the 20 Senate districts in the state. So they've divided Alaska up into 20 districts. Each Senate district has 2 corresponding House districts. The House of Representatives has 40 members who serve 2-year terms. That's the same as the House of Representatives at the national level, 2-year terms, and is presided over by the Speaker of the House. And again, the Speaker of the House has an amazing amount of power to decide which bills are considered or yanked or whatever. So, for example, Senate District B encompasses House District 3 and House District 4. Senate District A encompasses House District 1 and 2. So 2 House districts per Senate. Very, very simple. So what is actually happening? This is where when you as a reporter are kind of immersed into this situation, you walk in the middle and you're trying to figure out where along the process am I? Like the video said, things begin as an idea, and ultimately they become laws if they are strong enough and they endure all of the debate that happens in committees. Those ideas can come from a legislator, a group of legislators, a committee, the governor, a non-professional or professional group. So there are a lot of groups that are not necessarily corporations or like 503s or whatever, but they're just a loose group of citizens that might get together and decide that they want something to happen. Or if you're alone and you have nobody and you can't find any legislator to help you with your ideas, then you can always try to use the petition process. And again, there is a wonderful website. This is a different website, elections.alaska.gov, and it's up there. I've just lifted where you're brought to if you hit that link. And there are rules about petitions. Now, doing it that way, not finding a lawmaker, is a way to get your idea onto a ballot in front of Alaskans or in front of a region of Alaska. Sometimes petitions are only about one political unit in Alaska and not a statewide issue. There are rules that you have to follow, and we won't get into, kind of the forest of all of those rules, but you can see the initiative petition timeline that I've put there. There are certain rules that have to be followed, and it is the duty of the Lieutenant Governor of Alaska and their office to make sure that you follow those rules if you choose to get something onto a ballot. If it is successful, it becomes a proposition, or sometimes they call them ballot measures, and they put those on the first convenient election. If it's a statewide, then the first convenient statewide election. If it's a local, then it would be like the first municipal election that they have, and it goes before the voters, and it is supposed to be followed. Supposed to be. There have been several petitions and initiatives that have come about that have never become a reality. One of them is the Juneau move, the Capitol move. Citizens decided they wanted to make that an initiative. It passed, but lawmakers got in the way. And you can study the Frank Initiative, F-R-A-N-K, if you want to check that one out, which kind of combated the decision of the citizens to move the Capitol. And so I think they've been trying to move the Capitol as long as I've been alive, and it's still in Juneau. You can see at the top, I say ranked choice voting. That just passed in Alaska, and that started out as an initiative, which is very interesting. All right, so back to the bill. Assuming you find somebody, a legislator, to sponsor or co-sponsor or kind of take you under their wing, they must be introduced by the legislator or a legislative committee or the governor. Not all states have a strong governor form of government where the governor can actually introduce bills, but Alaska does. And that confuses a lot of people. They're like, wait a minute. Why is Governor Dunleavy introducing ideas into the legislative? Aren't they supposed to be separate? Yeah, they are, but that has been hammered out. And there are some states where governors are allowed to do that. And of course, you know, the President of the United States is also willing to, or able to do that as the executive in the United States government. So has to go through the Rules Committee. It must be communicated to one of those folks who kind of take it under their wing and sponsor it. And that's just the beginning. So the introduction and reading happens with the bodies all together. And it's not done until it has been drafted and printed through the Legislative Affairs Agency or Legal Services. Gives them an opportunity to pore over the idea and make sure everything is constitutional, make sure that it's not going to violate any pre-existing statutes. And then that bill, if it cuts the mustard there, is introduced by the sponsor during the floor session of either the House or the Senate, depending on which house the bill originated in. That is known as the first reading, and they still use those terms. Every legislator gets to basically submit their bill into a little hopper, and then that bill is either read by them or it is read by someone that they delegate to read it. During this reading, the bill is referred to committees. So they go ahead and decide where is it most appropriate that those bills belong, which committees should see them. And those legislative committees are 10 standing committees which consider issues within their jurisdictions. Sometimes you have subcommittees, but at this time we're just going to keep it really simple and show you the 10. Education, finance, health and social services, judiciary, which means the courts, labor and commerce, community and regional affairs, resources, and that means like physical resources, land, think of it that way. Any decisions that have to be made about property and land management, rules, and state affairs. So there we have it. Now, in all of those committees, they have to elect committee chairpersons. Those committee chairpersons have an amazing amount of power. They can control whether those bills are going to be considered or whether they are just going to be tabled, which means they never really do anything, or they just shove them into their desk and forget about them. They have an amazing amount of power. And again, the Senate president or the House Speaker can come in and they can make those decisions for the committee chairs as well and say, let's consider this one or let's not consider this one in our committee. So they can literally die in committee. All of the banter that goes on in those committees has to be governed according to rules that have been passed by these bodies, and that they all use parliamentary procedure, which will say, oh, I forgot transportation. Sorry about that. There's transportation. All right, so this is the uniform rules, and it is, I think, 42, if I'm not mistaken, pages. And there are a lot of rules to follow. Every one of them has underlying statutes too that govern them. So you can literally go online and look at every single rule and find out what happened with it, who supported it, who didn't support it, who co-sponsored it, etc. The reason I pulled this language up, I don't want to read this whole thing to you, but this is uniquely Alaskan. Some states have kind of followed Alaska's lead on this, but what we decided to do was come up with a uniform system where the rules apply to both the Senate and the House. So they have to follow the same rules. As you know, at the national level, the Senate operates very differently and according to a totally different set of rules than the House does, and it becomes very confusing for people trying to follow the legislative process. In Alaska, it's been simplified. As you can see there, at the beginning of the first regular session, both houses shall adopt uniform rules of procedure for enacting bills into law and adopting resolutions. This prevents a lot of, shall we call it, mischievous behavior from occurring because they know which rules they can and cannot follow as they are doing what they're doing. All right. So, let's see, cute little committee there. By the way, just to point out, I know that video was 1974, I'm Just a Bill, but there weren't any women in there. That really bothers me, right? It was very, very male dominated. They look a lot different these days, obviously. Each committee has to have an odd number of members for obvious reasons. If you have even, then there's the tie just doesn't work. It has to be presided over by a chairperson. And one of the things those standing rules do that I showed you is they're very particular about what kinds of what kinds of numbers have to be followed if a committee is only 5 people or 9 people, depending on the committee and how many are allowed in there. But it's always got to be odd. And in order to conduct business, half the number of members plus 1 must be present. This is called a quorum. If they don't have a quorum, they can get into big ethical and legal problems because of, again, other laws that are, ensuring that it's a public meeting that the public should, in theory, be able to attend and monitor. Once a bill has been referred to a committee, if hearings, then a hearing may be held. And at that point, they might invite members of the public to come in and testify, and sometimes experts to come in and testify. And again, those only happen if it pleases the chair, because at any time in the process, the chair can squat on it and say, no, I don't want this to even happen. The sponsor presents the bill to the committee, public testimony is heard, and the committee members discuss and argue about it. And then if modifications need to be made to that bill or deletions, then those are changes that we call amendments. All right. So one of the things that is really confusing, especially if you're a reporter that is thrown into one of these committee meetings or floor votes, is they're using parliamentary procedure. And some people learn about it in school and others don't. If you were in student government, if you did OSOG, if you did boys state, girls state, a lot of these people use Robert's rules or try to. And they're controversial. There are some people that say, you know, there's too much to know, but we still think they're efficient around the country and in the state, and so most committees will use them. You'll notice school boards using them, you'll notice assemblies using them, and you'll notice these legislators using them as well. It really helps you to familiarize yourself with common motions and rules for those motions so that you don't get lost in what they're actually voting on. And my favorite of all of these, this is the same cheat sheet that I used to pass out to high school seniors when we did our mock Congress, is closed debate or unanimously closed debate. So you can see, I don't know if you can see my little pointer. Can you see that? Can you see my pointer? Okay, so closed debate, it tells you literally how you say it, and then it tells you the rules. Does it need a second? Yes, it does. Can it be amended? No. Is it debatable? No. And it requires a 2/3 majority of those members present in order to close debate. And if you successfully close debate, it has to move to a vote, basically. Some people use the second form of it, which is calling the question. And as you can notice, the only difference is it doesn't need a second. You have to vote immediately. If you get a sense that committee members are sick and tired of debating, and you just want to force the vote, then you can go ahead and try to call the question. Usually there's one ally out there that will second it. And so you'll see moving the question is a lot more popular when these people are debating these things. So there's a link down there for Robert's Rules. You can go online, you can look at it there, or you can go buy one. Great insomnia material for you. When formal debate has concluded, the members vote to move the bill out of committee, again, if it pleases the chair. It's pretty amazing how much power these chair people have. It's not a good idea for them to go ahead and hide bills or not act on bills, because it kind of ruins their reputation if they do, and then there are consequences. But as you know, at the national level, there's a man named Mr. McConnell, who is a majority leader of the Republicans, and he has successfully sat on a number of bills and not allowed them to even move to committee. So the bill then moves on to its next committee or referral, if it survives. After the bill has moved through all of its committees of referral, it is scheduled for floor action. This is confusing because some people think all bills have to go through all committees. That's not true. Sometimes they have to go through 2, sometimes they have to go through 5, depending on the bill and depending on which of those committees might have a vested interest in it. And again, those are all rules that are set by the either Senate President or the Speaker of the House and their caucuses with their own groups, either the Democrats or the Republicans. So there's our bill moving across on top. It has successfully moved through. If it originated in the House of Representatives, it would now be put to the full House for debate. If it originated in the Senate, it would now be put to the full Senate for debate. And again, if it pleases the chair. And then further amendments can be tacked on here as well. So this is called the second reading. And sometimes bills go from second back to committee, or they go from the actual floor vote back to the second reading because there are just so many amendments or changes that they've decided need to be considered before they come back to the floor. After amendments have been offered and voted on in the second reading, the bill moves on to the third reading, which is usually on the next day after they decide it's ready, that the House convenes. And again, if the chair pleases. Here it is voted on for final passage. An affirmative or yes vote requires a majority of the full body. So we always say 50% plus 1. That's an easy way to remember it. Sometimes some bills will require a 2/3 majority in order to pass, but again, those are things that can be investigated, and rules that can be found on those specific bills. If it requires further amendment, it is returned, as we said. If it does not require further amendment and the bill manages to pass the House or pass the Senate, if we're considering the Senate, then it must go through the same process in the other House. We consider both of them houses, but we call one Senate, we call one House of Representatives. All right. If the bill travels through the entire process in the Senate, then it is considered to have passed both houses. Or if it passes through the House after the Senate, then it is considered to have passed through both. The final version is then signed by the Senate President. And then the Speaker of the House has to sign it as well. And then it is delivered to the governor. Yes, absolutely. Nancy Pelosi has sat on a number of bills. Sorry, I didn't mean to infer that that was only one person who has done that. And that is a fabulous question. It's just the sheer amount of bills that I think the Senate gets most of the bad press for. All right, so I have to do that. You can review a specific bill or do research on any of these through the legislative website. Who authored it? Whose committee is it in? What is it? Where is it? When is it expected to do whatever? Why is it expected to maybe die or get passed? One of the jobs of some of the officers in the legislature is to run around and keep track of how many votes they think they have for a bill or don't have for a bill, both in committee and on the floor. So anything regarding status of the bill, you can look up on the website. There it is again. And I know some of you have already been doing that, and so we won't waste time on that. You can visit that site and you can literally take a virtual tour of the Capitol if you want. So this is a screenshot of what comes up when you get to that site. And this is, probably the most popular page for anybody doing research. You can see that they have broken them down by bills that are waiting action, sent to committee, in committee. You can check out the vetoes. You can enter the bill in the little space up here and get information on it. And also gavel to gavel is super helpful. A lot of times gavel to gavel will go ahead and video the hearings, and then you can watch them at your leisure, which again, this was not even available until the late 90s. And then you basically had to go here and figure out when it was going to be on TV and then watch it on TV. Now they are able to go ahead and put these on. So you can also look at Supreme Court oral arguments on Gavel to Gavel. It's just a super, super helpful website. And I think they still have a channel devoted to Gavel too up there, right? 360 North, if I'm okay. Liz is nodding her head, so for sure. All right, so at this point, the governor may sign the bill into law, allow the bill to become law without their signature, or they can veto the bill. And veto is an official action by the governor which nullifies the action of the legislature. As you can probably guess, it is very controversial when straight out vetoes happen. If it does happen, then usually it can be overridden by the legislature. Sometimes vetoes will require a 2/3 majority. Other times they will require a 3/4 majority. So that's really important to understand too. Just because the executive decides that the bill is not worthy does not necessarily mean that the bill won't become law. If it has not been vetoed, it will become law 90 days later unless there has been a different effective date specified within the bill itself. And sometimes they will shorten that, sometimes they'll lengthen it depending on the dynamics of that bill. That's different than the national. Usually it's 10 days, I believe, at the national level that the president has to either sign it or not sign it and allow it to become law. In Alaska, the governor may also use the power of the line item veto. Very controversial. Usually the line item veto is used for budgetary considerations. Not all states have the line item veto, but I think we're up to, somebody will check me on it, I'm sure, but I think we're up to 42 states that now have the line item veto, and Alaska is one of them. Gives the governor the power to go ahead and literally take out expenditures if they wish. The Supreme Court ruled in 1998 that the line item veto is unconstitutional, and this is why it remains so controversial. So far, nobody has really tested that, and states continue to do it that had it, including Alaska. And this last link here you can see is 2019. This was when Alaska's current governor unveiled line item vetoes and signed an operating budget. And there's an article from Jeremy Schur, I think that's how you say it, about that. The video won't play. I just literally took a screenshot, but you can see where on that day, he unveiled line item vetoes that the administration said amounted to another 391 million in cuts beyond the legislature's budget. He's not the only governor that has used the line item veto. Again, you can go to the legislative website and you can research any year and you can see which governors have used that power and which governors have not used that power throughout Alaska's history, at least as a state. All right, so from a bill to enact to a law, I think we're doing okay on time, Liz, I hope. All right, so now that the bill has become a law, it is called an act. That act is given a chapter number and it becomes session law. The session laws are reviewed by the Legislative Affairs Agency, again, to make sure that grammatically they make sense, that the language sings as much as it can sing in legalese, and then it is sent to be published. When it is published, it has now become a part of the codified body of laws enacted by the legislature, which we know as the Alaska statutes. So when you see those initials AS before something, you know that it is an Alaska statute that has basically endured the bill to law process, and it is put into these books, which you can find at many law libraries, physical copies. A lot of government teachers have them. You can find them digitally now. Again, huge advantage here to be able to research online and actually look at those statutes without having to create space in your office for them. But a lot of people like to have them anyway, just as a physical reminder. And that's just one of them. You can see volume 3, title 10 to title 12. Okay. So here's our answer. What is the percentage of bills that make it to law? What I did was literally went to the website and looked at how many bills were sponsored and then how many became laws going back to 2008. I could have gone further, but I got a little bit lazy at the last minute. And then I just looked at the average, and you can see there, 25, 24, 20, 32, 20, 23. Probably each of those numbers has a specific story behind why there were so many or so little that survived. But typically, on average, there's about a 24 to 25% chance that any one bill will become a law in a year in Alaska. So basically 1 in 4 chance. And nationally, that's usually 15%. It has been higher. It has been lower. It's been as low as 12%. But again, it depends on the time window that you're looking at. But it gives you at least a general idea statistically of how few will become actual laws. All right. If you would like more detailed information about the legislative process or the Alaska legislature, you can visit the public website. And again, there it is. We've shown it many times. I believe that is probably the best website for you if you're looking for specific who's, what's, when's, where's, and how's of bills. But there are some other helpful links. One of the biggest issues in Alaska is our relationship with Alaska Natives. We, as a state, have more of an indigenous population than any other state in the Union. And Alaska has treated its natives uniquely in comparison to how other states have, given them an incredible amount of sovereignty. The AFN is its own type of legislative entity. The largest democratic entity in the world, I believe, it still holds that that distinction. And you can learn a lot about that at alaschool.org, which really focuses on how the natives interact with the state legislatively and the federal government. The federal government still owns, I believe, 66% of all Alaska land. So there is a tremendous amount of dynamics that occur between private ownership, state ownership, federal ownership, and native ownership just on land, not to mention all of the other things that happen on that land. Wikipedia has an amazing website on the Alaska legislature, surprisingly, because sometimes people don't like Wikipedia, but I think they've actually, it's pretty, I learned a lot when I went there. Also Ballotpedia. For any state in the Union, it's helpful, but for Alaska, it's really helpful to understand who's been running in which election, which bills they've passed, how many they've passed, and things like that. All right. So are there other questions out there that I'm not seeing or hearing?
And why don't we go ahead and give Mr. Sant a virtual round of applause for that presentation. Thank you so much, Mr. Sant. That was awesome.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I hope it was helpful. And I hope that it wasn't too complex. I know Liz and I really wanted to try to make this as simple as possible, but also interesting.
Yeah, definitely. That's actually one of the reasons that I reached out and asked Mr. Sant if he would do this presentation, because he has that reputation for making anything, including government, fun and exciting and interesting. And one of the things that we didn't talk about today, but I think might be something that reporters will run into, is the companion bill. Sometimes when legislators, they want to introduce a bill in one body to fast track it, they might find a sponsor in the other body who will introduce similar or the same legislation there, and that kind of fast tracks the process. So whichever one prevails in their body first then gets sent over to the other side. So something to maybe watch out for as a reporter is a member of the House, for example, cannot sponsor a bill in the Senate, and a member of the Senate cannot sponsor a bill in the House. So sometimes you'll see a legislator who has been working on a companion bill, for example, of, say, a Senate bill that passed, SB 91, for example. Maybe there was a companion bill in the House that was sponsored by a House member. Just something to watch your language on when you're reporting, to be wary of saying that House member sponsored the bill. If it was actually a Senate bill that prevailed, you just want to be wary of the language there, and you could say that they co-sponsored a companion bill, or they sponsored similar legislation in the House.
Yeah, good point. And also, Liz and I decided not to get into a lot of the nitty gritty on some of the dynamics that are happening in Alaska. But those of you who are kind of news nerds probably understand that one of the biggest controversies right now is we have a split legislature, basically. And so there's a lot of caucusing that goes on, and a lot of unique caucuses where you have Republicans joining Democrats and Democrats sometimes joining Republicans. And it really has changed the composure and the complexity of the legislature, because gone are the days where basically blue was blue, red was red, and then sometimes they met. Now you have these special caucuses, which can make it kind of hard to follow. And I know there are some voters who are hoping that goes away, and that might have been some of the motivation behind the ranked choice voting movement, was that people should not be able to kind of camouflage themselves or hide themselves from what their actual values and beliefs are on a specific issue. But I think it's really complex, and so we decided, we weren't gonna spend a lot of time on that.
Yeah, today we really wanted to cover sort of the mechanics of how does a bill even become law, because as we saw, there's a lot of layers to it, and things can move around as well. Maybe there was a bill that was in committee for the first session. Each legislature has two regular sessions, and so maybe then that bill is resurrected again in the
Yep.
next year, and it seemingly comes out of nowhere. Things can be moving so quickly, and you can have hearings on many interesting bills all happening at the same time. And so hopefully we gave you some resources today to kind of be able to keep tabs on what is happening where, or to be able to tune in to hearings that may be happening simultaneously, and really get a handle on what's happening daily in the legislature during the session.
Yeah, and Liz was mentioning earlier, and I think it's really important, before we even started this, when we were just kind of sidebarring, that any question you can't get answered from that website, you really need to learn how to communicate with those librarians, those legislative librarians, because they love to answer or find answers for you. So
Yes.
email, phone call, person, whatever.
Yes, and in fact, Jennifer Fletcher, who was the legislative librarian that presented with us at Press Club, she has passed along all of her contact information, and I see Rosie is posting that in the chat for anybody
Nice.
who wants to just make a note of that. She's very responsive by email. You can also call in a question. So there are resources available if you get stuck and don't know where to go. That's a great place to start.
Excellent.
Well, if there aren't any questions, oh, wonderful. So glad to see some comments here. People found the presentation very
Yeah,
helpful.
thank you for the wonderful comments, everyone.
Oh, and I will point out too, we also have recordings of the other two sessions that we've done on legislative topics. Sam is posting some of those in the chat right now, the link to the one by Jennifer Fletcher. And we also had one by Tim Bradner and Larry Pursley on the basics of the state budget. And so that one is also available on YouTube and on the Alaska Press Club's website, if for anybody who missed those presentations and wants to go back and catch those. And we will post a recording of this presentation on the Press Club's website as well. So if you want to go back and review anything, or if you know anyone who might find value in this presentation but wasn't able to attend, please feel free to share that link as well with them. And I forgot to mention it at the beginning, but at the end of all of these presentations, we like to have a trivia question. And it's a fun opportunity to win some Press Club swag. So in keeping with our tradition here on these sessions, we're going to ask you a trivia question. And the first person to type the answer into the chat will win some Press Club swag of their choosing. Rosie will be in touch with you later to find out what that might be. So our trivia question today is, who was the first governor of the state of Alaska? Who was the first governor of the state of Alaska? Okay, all right, a lot of questions. Okay, so a lot of them coming in at the same time. It was William or Bill Egan. So we've got a lot of Egans in there, but I think we might give it to Shane Nuesca, because Shane actually has the full name there, William Egan, not to be confused with his son, Dennis Egan, who also served in the legislature for many years. So wonderful.
Yay.
Good job, you guys. That was really quick. Awesome job, Shane. Congratulations. Rosie will be in touch with you about that Press Club swag, by the way. And Shane says, yay, finally.
Finally.
For some Press Club swag. It is snazzy.
Oh, Victoria too is Rosie saying.
Okay, Victoria too. All right. That's fair. Awesome. Thank you guys. That was a really, you guys were quick on your toes for that one. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I know you all probably have busy days and deadlines to get to. And so I just want to thank our speaker, Mr. Sant, today one last time, and thank all of our attendees. Thank you for joining us for this presentation. As you know, a session is right around the corner. It starts on Tuesday. So we hope that you'll be able to find value in this presentation, and that this might make you helpful or be helpful to you in your coverage of the legislative session this year.
Great. And
Awesome.
I
Thank
just
you
want
so
to
much.
add my email is up there at the top. I think you can still see it. If any of you have other questions that we didn't cover that you would you need, or if you want any of the resources, I'll be happy to send you this entire keynote presentation. Be happy to send you a copy of the cheat sheet that I showed you for parliamentary procedure. Any of those things, feel free to bug me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Mr. Sant, for an amazing presentation, all of the time and effort that you put into sharing all of this information with us. We really appreciate that. And for anybody attending today, if you have ideas for other presentations that you'd like to see, please let us know, email us. We're always open to those suggestions. If there anybody out there that you think would be a great speaker for one of these sessions, please feel free to chime in. And we thank you very much for attending. And we ask that you stay tuned for our next session. We'll be rolling out another session like this one in February. So stay tuned for that. And thank you all very much for your time this morning. We hope you have a wonderful day. And we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.